because phase shift can be a little daunting and a little crazy and confusing, we're going to spend one more day talking about graphing sine and cosine curves with phase shift. Just do a couple examples and then you'll have about 4 problems in your homework. So let's go ahead and get started with our first example. You'll notice that our b value has not been factored out, so that's the first thing we're going to take care of. So let's go off to the side or right above and let's factor this out. So we have -3 sine of, now this is interesting, the number in front of x is -2. You're going to go ahead and factor that out. We're still going to have one more step to take care of. So we're adding this by -2 and this by -2. So x plus pi over 4 plus 1. Again, if this is confusing, take your calculator, do -1/2 divided by -2. Should get +1/4. Don't put pi in the calculator. Now take a look how this negative is here. That b value is never going to be negative. So what you have to do in this step is you're going to take that negative and bump it to the front of the equation. So our final equation is actually going to be +3 sine of 2 times the quantity of x plus pi over 4 plus 1. This is the equation that we will use for the remainder of our problem. Go ahead and label your a, b, c, and d values. And then let's fill in our vocabulary words. Amplitude is +3. Again, even if that negative stayed out there, it would still be a +3. Amplitude's always positive. To find the period, we'll take 2 pi, divide by b. So we have 2 pi over 2. Simplify that out to pi. So that means that the whole distance from beginning to end on the horizontal axis should take pi units. Phase shift is our c value. C value looks like positive pi over 4. We actually are going to go left pi over 4. So it's negative pi over 4. Remember, this is the same as our starting point on our x-axis. Vertical shift is 1. So that means we're going up 1 on our y-axis. And then let's find some additional things. So remember to find the endpoint. We take c, the phase shift, and add the period. So it would be negative pi over 4 plus pi, which gives you 3 pi over 4. So that is our end. Last thing we're going to find, or second to last thing, is that what we're counting by on our x-axis. So when we graph our sine curve and we have 5 tick marks, what we're doing to get from bounce to bounce. To find that, take the period, divide by 4. Our period in this case is pi. Divide by 4, we get pi over 4. So we're adding 1/4 pi from tick mark to tick mark. The last thing I want you to include on there is what the pattern is going to be according to the sine or cosine curve. Since this is a sine curve and it's a positive amplitude, we're going to start at the center, go to the top, back to the center, down to the bottom, and back to the center. Okay, let's label our axes. Center line has a vertical shift up 1. The amplitude says go 3 above it. So we go 1, 2, 3 above it to +4, and go 3 below it to -2. Our x-axis is going to start at negative pi over 4. Now I want you to notice something here. Oh, by the way, we're ending at 3 pi over 4. We're going to need a total of 5 tick marks, right? Now, when we're adding, to find what our tick marks are counting by, go down to that bottom thing that we found, pi over 4. We're adding pi over 4. So if we have -1/4 pi and we add a 1/4 pi, then one of our tick marks is actually going to land on the y-axis. So that's one of our tick marks. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. So we have negative 1/4 over at the start, plus a fourth is 0. 0 plus a fourth gives us pi over 4. 1/4 plus another fourth gives us 2/4, which is pi over 2. And 2/4 plus a fourth gives us 3/4. So now we have our x-axis labeled and our y-axis labeled. We're ready to graph our points. Let's go ahead and do that. Start at negative pi over 4, and it's a sine curve, so we start at the center. Our next tick mark is on the y-axis. We go to the top, back to the center, down to the bottom, back to the center. We've got our lovely transformed sine curve. Pause and rewatch if any of that stumped you a little bit. We'll have one more to get through. In our final example down here, you'll notice again that our b value has not been factored out. So in your first step, factor out this 2 by dividing both the b and the c value by 2. Negative 1/2 divided by 2 is negative 1/4, so we have negative pi over 4 in there. Label each piece of your curve. Now let's go through and find what each of these values is equal to. When you find your amplitude, make sure to take the absolute value of that negative 2. Now, when I have a negative out in front, I always make a big deal about it because it's easy to forget. That negative is going to, in the future, affect our pattern when we fill that out. So while it doesn't affect the amplitude, it does affect the shape of the curve. We'll get there in a minute. Find the period. The distance from the start on the x-axis to the end of the cycle should be pi units. Find the phase shift. Remember to take the opposite. That's your start on the x-axis. Find your vertical shift. In this case, nada. So we've gone through A, B, C, and D. Now let's find our additional pieces of the graph. Endpoint. Should be 5 pi over 4. Remember, we don't write that as a mixed number. We can just leave it as 5 pi over 4. So this is where our graph should end on the x-axis. Now, just to be clear, that's where our graph is going to end because we're only graphing one period, but this graph goes on forever and ever and ever to the left and to the right. Let's find what we count by. Each tick mark should be adding 1/4 pi. And then finally, your pattern. It's a cosine curve, but it's also a negative cosine curve. So instead of starting at the top, it's going to start at the bottom and make kind of an anthill look. So it starts at the bottom, back to the center, top, center, bottom. Notice how there's 5 pieces. You should have 5 tick marks along your x-axis. Let's try labeling. There's no vertical shift, but our amplitude is 2. Meaning we're going 2 above the center and 2 below the center. There's like a vertical stretch. The x-axis starts at pi over 4. It ends at 5 pi over 4. To find what we count by, to get all 5 of our tick marks, we're going to be adding pi over 4. Go ahead and try filling those in. Check yourself, make sure you did that okay. If it helps you, maybe put a little star or a little highlight by the starting point and the ending point so you know where to take your pattern and begin and end it. We're going to start at pi over 4, and it's a reflected cosine curve, so we're going to go down to the bottom for our first point. At pi over 2, you should go back to the center. At 3 pi over 4, up to the top, back to the center, and then down to the bottom. Looks like a little anthill. Just one cycle of that curve, but it would continue on and on forever to either side. Let's find the domain and range, and then we will be good to go. Domain, you should be getting the hang of that now, is never ending to the left or to the right. The range, go to your lowest y value, we get -2. Highest y value is +2. Inclusive, meaning you need those brackets. You now have quite a few examples of how to graph sine and cosine curves with phase shift. Go back to any of those to help you out as you try tonight's homework and last night's homework, graphing sine and cosine curves with phase shift.